Welcome to Weekend Crafting Adventures with Kim Wojtalowicz. Get ready to learn all about her latest craft project as she reveals experiences with the Cricut cutting machine. Follow along as she discusses her project's successes and fails, shares her inspiration, tips and tricks, and overall satisfaction rating for each project. Now, here's your host, Kim.
Hi, crafties, and welcome to Weekend Crafting Adventures. I'm Kim, and today I will be sharing with you some experiences about a craft project that is very near and dear to my heart, one of my favorite things to make and to wear, which is hats. So I'm going to talk about my experience using the Cricut hat heat press to make hats. And I'm going to share with you my experience using both Infusible ink to make a hat and also heat transfer vinyl. I want to share with you the inspiration behind this project. And the inspiration is that I'm a hat girl. I love hats. I love making hats with the Cricut Maker. And it is actually after the first couple of projects that I did with my Cricut Maker, I knew I needed to figure out how I could make hats. And that was before the hat press was even created from Cricut. And so I got creative and I used my Cricut mini press and also something called a sewing ham. And the sewing ham was used to put inside the curved shape of the hat to help give me some stability when I was attaching the heat transfer vinyl to the hats I was making. And this was not easy. It was challenging to figure out how to get the vinyl on correctly and keep that stability underneath while I was attaching the vinyl to the curve of the hat. So you would not be surprised at how excited I was when I heard that Cricut was coming out with a hat press, because I definitely felt like this was something that would be well worth the money spent, because I make tons of hats. I wear them all the time. I make them for my husband, I make them for my boys, and I make them for me. So that is the inspiration behind this project. And I did do an unboxing video of the hat press and everything that comes with it in the box. And I will be posting that this week as well. So if you haven't seen the hat press or are wondering what comes in the box when you get it, look for that unboxing. It was actually really fun to do that. It was my first unboxing video. So I want to talk a little bit about the materials that you will need if you are going to try and make a hat with the Cricut hat press. First thing you're going to need to find are some hat blanks. And I really like using 5-panel hats. The 5-panel hat does look a little bit more like a trucker hat, a little bit of a taller crown, and lots of times has the mesh backing and snap back. I really like that. I can use it in lots of different ways, whether my hair's up or my hair's down, and it fits well with the rest of my family. So those kinds of hats are my favorite to use. Another reason why I love the 5-panel hat is that there is no seam that comes down the middle of the front of the baseball hat. So you'll look at lots of different blanks out there, or baseball hats, and a lot of them have that seam that run right down the middle. And for me, when I am putting designs on a hat or wanting to wear a hat, I really like the look of just that flat front panel. So that's what I look for in a blank when I'm going to attach the vinyl to the front of the hat. My two favorite kinds of hats that I have used many times before in making putting heat transfer vinyl on a baseball or trucker hat are Yupong hats and BK caps. Those two I've had lots of success with. I find that they fit a wide range of heads, whether it's mine or my husband or my boys or friends and family. So those two kinds of hats I've had a lot of success with, and I'll put some links to where you can find those on the blog post. And then I also did want to let you know that I'm going to be talking a little bit about the infusible ink and using my hat press to put infusible ink on a baseball hat. And when you are using infusible ink, or if that is the direction you choose to go for creating a hat, you need to use a specific blank hat for that ink. And that is a Cricut, either baseball hat or trucker hat. I used the Cricut trucker hat, and I'm thinking they probably have a regular baseball hat that you can put infusible ink on, but I know for sure they have a white and black trucker hat, and that is the blank that I used when I was using infusible ink and my hat press for the first time. You're also going to need to figure out what you want to put on your hat, whether it's a saying, an image, a scene, anything you want. Sky's the limit, but make sure when you are thinking about your design for the hat, you're taking into consideration not only the curve of the hat, but also the size that you're going to be working with. So you're going to probably need to keep your design, and what I usually do is between about 2.5 inches tall. And then depending what image I chose, if it's more like a rectangular image, that can go a little bit bigger. You can get to almost about 3.5, 4 inches across the hat. But if you're doing something like a circle or something round, just keep in mind that that curve of the hat is going to affect your design and how it goes on the hat. You will also need, of course, your hat press. I also use my Cricut mini press when I'm making hats. I find that really comes in handy for some little spaces if I need to touch up the vinyl. And then also some Teflon sheets, and you will also need some butcher paper for the infusible ink if that's the direction you go. So I want to get into my experience in using the hat press to put some heat transfer vinyl onto a trucker hat. I decided to start with the heat transfer vinyl because that is something that I have done a lot in the past. I've really made a lot of hats, and so I know what I'm doing when it comes to getting the right size and all of the materials. But what was different about this for me was obviously that I was going to be using this Cricut hat press for the first time. So I went with a design for my husband. I wanted to make him a new trucker hat, and I wanted to use a retro sunset design with a mountain that would be on top of that retro sunset design. So I did find the SVG that I was using from Etsy, and I added one of the mountains that I had in my Cricut design space that I already had in the images area on top of that design. And so that design had no border around it. So it was the retro colors in a sunset shape. And I felt like it was going to need a little something more on the hat because I was using a white front with a black mesh and snap-on back trucker hat from BK Caps. And so I went into my Cricut design space after I uploaded the images and I got it to the size that I wanted. This was more of a horizontal sunset image. And so that gave me a little more flexibility in size, knowing that it was going to be on the front of the hat. And so I went and chose to use the offset tool in Cricut Design Space. And if you haven't tried the offset tool, it's a really neat little function that takes your image, and when you highlight your image and go up to the offset tool, you will get a choice of either having rounded edges, or if you've got corners, let's say on your image or your word or your phrase, you can choose to have it more of a regular kind of corner. I chose the rounded edge. And once you push the button to apply it, you can decide on the thickness. And what that does is it creates like almost like a 3D outline of your image. And why that worked so well for me was that it was going to give me a nice crisp border around that entire sunset image that I was putting on the hat. Because the hat itself was white, I made that offset black, and that created a way for me to layer the vinyl on top of that black background that the offset function helped me create. And it really created this cool looking in-depth design on the front of the hat that then I could put the mountain on top of. So that was really fun. And using that tool, I would highly suggest just kind of using it and trying it out with different images. Even if you choose not to use it, keep it there in your crafting keepers, because it's a really cool function that really helps bring some depth and even almost 3D look to some of those images and designs. So once I had that design ready to go, I had my Cricut Maker cut out all of my vinyl, and then I had to get my hat ready. Something that is super important when you are making a hat is that you use a lint brush to get all of the lint or little pieces of material or fuzz or dust, anything that's kind of been sitting on that front of the hat, off with your lint brush. And then I had to set up my heat press and put my hat on one of the coolest things that comes with the Cricut hat press, which is this hat form, is what I'm going to call it. It looks like kind of a ball, but it's almost like flat on the bottom, and you put your hat on it. So you unsnap the back of your hat, you put the form in the hat, make sure you keep that little handle. There's a little handle for the form that says Cricut across it. You keep that facing out, and then you can tighten your hat around the hat form. So no more sewing ham for me. Now I actually have something that is made specifically to fulfill that hat and provide that stability that you need when you're applying your designs to the hat. So that is one of my favorite things about this project, and also what comes with the hat press. I do want to share with you a couple of things about the Cricut hat press, which actually I did not know when I first got it, but learned quickly as I was setting it up. So in order to actually activate that hat press for the first time, you need to either have an iOS device or an Android device. And what you're going to need to do is get the Cricut Heat app on that device, and that is actually how you have to activate your heat press for the first time. So I'm not sure if you do not have one of those devices, if using this or buying this heat press is right for you. So make sure to do some more investigation. If you do not have one of those iOS or Android devices and you're thinking about maybe purchasing the heat press, check into that because it is not cheap. The heat press is about $150. So before you spend the money on that, make sure that you have the correct device and hardware and materials that are going to allow you to use that. So now I have my heat press activated. My hat is around my hat form, which is super fun. And I've lint rolled my front of my hat and I'm ready to attach my design to the hat. I don't think I mentioned it in materials, but here is a really important piece that you need. You need some heat transfer tape. When you're working with designs and putting them on the curve of the hat, you're really going to need to use some heat transfer tape in order to keep that image in place before you apply heat with the heat press. And something that I also learned, it kind of backs up to my sewing experience, is that the design is on your transfer carrier paper, and that's flat. And we're putting it on something that's curved. And one thing I learned when I was sewing is that when you're trying to sew around a curve, a lot of times what you do is kind of, after you sew it, in order for the curve to look its best and to lay flat, you add some little cuts all the way around that curve. And so I think about that and similar to the hat and how I'm trying to get this flat design onto a curved base or product, which is the hat. And so putting some little snips in that carrier transfer paper, I'm not talking into your design, I'm talking on that clear carrier sheet that you're going to be using before you apply the heat, that sometimes can really help your design get a better form to your hat. So maybe try that a little bit. Sometimes, depending on your design, it can be a little tricky to get it to lie flat and make sure that you're getting the best press with the vinyl. So putting those little cuts around and then attaching that design to the hat with the heat transfer tape, that is super important. After that, you're going to look at your Cricut heat guide. This guide pops up on your phone or device that you've activated your heat press with, and you actually go in and tell it exactly what you're making. So it asks you what type of material you're using. So this was heat transfer vinyl. And then what is your base? And mine is a cotton poly blend trucker hat. Once you give Cricut Heat app all of that information, it gives you specific heating instructions and walks you through the entire process. It actually wirelessly connects to the hat press. So once you say start new project and you put your information in and you push start, it's going to send the information to your hat press for the preheat of the hat. And then it's going to walk you through exactly what to do, which is continual motion with this hat press. The hat press, again, is curved, just like the top of the hat that you're going to be doing. And they give very specific instructions. That is something that needs continuous motion back and forth while you're applying that heat to get your heat transfer vinyl or infusible ink to attach to that hat. So this app walks you through everything. It's really a cool app. And I actually think that you can use it for lots of different things that you're making with Cricut. But the first time I used this heat app from Cricut was specifically for the hat press. After I heated the vinyl with the Cricut hat press on this retro sunset mountain design that I was making for my husband on the trucker hat, I peeled away the carrier paper. And of course, I always am using like a Teflon sheet. And I do give it just one more once over with that heat press just to make sure that everything has got a good attachment to the hat. This is where I will tell you I do use my Cricut mini press, heat press. And if there's just a little area of vinyl that I'm seeing has not completely attached or that I missed, instead of using the whole hat press again over the whole design, I make sure I cover that Teflon, cover my hat and the design with the Teflon sheet. And then I use my mini press and I just really get that tiny little area that needed to be pressed again in order for it to get a good press and attachment to the hat. So I will tell you that is something that I did, even though the hat press is meant to get everything attached. For me, there was a couple of times where I just really had a little bit of piece of vinyl, a little bit closer down to maybe the brim of the hat or up by the crown, where I needed to use that mini press to get the good attachment. So that hat came out great. And my husband has a new hat to wear now for the fall going into winter. And I now want to talk about this infusible ink. I have been interested in trying the infusible ink product from Cricut since it came out. And because I had this heat press and I wanted to try the infusible ink, I decided that I would do an infusible ink trucker hat for myself. So, a couple of things about this infusible ink. I mentioned it towards the beginning. You have to use specific blanks for infusible ink for them to work. So there is a lot of information out on in the internet on different sites about the infusible ink and the different materials that you can use it on. Because I do not want to waste material or money, again, I decided to go with the Cricut infusible ink and also the Cricut blank trucker hat that you use when you're using infusible ink materials. So this was very cool. Infusible ink is exciting because it doesn't have any edges to it. So if you're thinking about vinyl and we're putting that on top of the base material, it's always going to have a little bit of an edge and it's, being attached on top of. Whereas infusible ink, as the name says, infuses into the material. So I really thought it would be cool because the color would be deep. It's different than peeling off the carrier sheet and having that vinyl on top. It actually is really soaking into that material, which gives it a different design and a different effect that I was looking forward to trying. I chose a design in Cricut Design Space for my infusible ink that was just a heart. And again, I went in and used the offset tool to create a um, kind of that 3D look around the original heart. I chose some infusible ink that was called a retro ombre ink, and it had kind of like a rust color with some turquoise. And I loved how that was going to look. And all I wanted to do was a simple heart. So I was going to do the rust ombre. It's kind of like a stripe, a horizontal stripe. I was going to do that in the center of the heart. And then around the outside of the heart, I just went with that deep turquoise color that came in this infusible ink set from Cricut. Cutting out the infusible ink paper, no problem. Very simple, very easy. I did then get it ready to put onto the Cricut hat blank, and I trimmed around to make sure I was going to get the best form on it. When I was putting the heat transfer tape around my design, one of the things that I really wasn't sure about was, would this heat transfer tape affect how the infusible ink went into the hat? I had been reading up on infusible ink a little bit before I was using it. And what I was reading is that really, to get the best vibrant colors from your infusible ink, you need to have the heat setting at the correct setting, and also even over that infusible ink when you are attaching it for the first time. So I haven't done enough experimentation with this infusible ink to understand all the ins and outs of it yet, but I was really thinking about how that heat transfer tape might create a little bit of an extra layer, and that may affect the colors that come through on my hat. So that will be something that I continue to learn about and investigate as I use infusible ink moving forward in crafting. So I did try and keep that heat transfer tape really just to the edge of the carrier sheet. And I really tried to minimize the amount of tape that was covering the infusible ink. With my vinyl, it doesn't make a difference if the tape is covering my design, but I wasn't sure with infusible ink, so I was pretty careful. The other thing that you need to have when you're putting an infusible ink design on a hat is butcher paper. This comes with your Cricut hat press when you get it in the box. So it reminds me of parchment paper. I'm not sure if there's a difference between parchment paper and butcher paper, but again, I used what Cricut gave me in hopes of getting the best result on my hat. So you cover that butcher paper over, and then again, using that Cricut heat guide, you're going to put your material in, you're going to choose the infusible ink setting, and it sends the heat setting automatically to your hat press, and away you go. Very simple process. I loved using this hat press. My hat with the infusible ink came out great. I love it. I will wear it often, and it was a fun new way to bring in a different kind of design into my Cricut crafting. But the hat press, love it. The hat form that goes inside your hat, that really is something that I am super excited about, because I never could find anything that fit into the shape of a hat the way the Cricut hat form does. So that really creates a nice surface to add designs onto the hat. So that brings me to my crafting keepers for this episode. And I have two crafting keepers. My first crafting keeper is going to be that offset tool in your Cricut design space. I think that is a really neat tool. You can use it for lots of different things in lots of different crafting projects. And it just gives a little extra depth to your design. It gives you a way to emphasize certain pieces of your design. And so that offset tool is something that I will continue to try and bring into different crafting projects. The other keeper is going to be that little tip I shared about snipping around the edges of your carrier paper when you are attaching your design to the hat, and then using your heat transfer tape to secure that design down to the curve of your hat. That crafting keeper is something that I continue to use as I make hats, and I make lots of hats. So hopefully that will come in handy for you if you're going to try to make a hat, or you're trying to get your design to get the best form and attachment onto the curve of that hat. That brings me to my satisfaction rating for this project. I'm going to give it a 4. I'm a hat girl. I love a good hat. So for me, this met lots of my crafting fun needs, and also gave me a couple new hats to wear, adding to my hat collection. And making hats, once you started, if it's something you enjoy, the longest part of the project is really figuring out what you want to put on your hat and then actually attaching it to the hat. But it's a pretty quick project, definitely doable in a weekend. So let me know if you've made hats before. What are you making? What are you putting on your hats? And have you had experiences with the Cricut hat maker? Shout them out to me and share them with me. I'd love to hear from you at hello@wcapodcast.com. Until our next adventure, take care.
That's all for this episode of Weekend Crafting Adventures. Now go get that Cricut machine off the shelf and get crafty. For more information on this crafting project, interesting tips, tricks, and techniques, visit wcapodcast.com. Until next time, when we embark on another adventure.